Welcome to the B2B Category Creators Podcast, hosted by Gil Allouche, founder and CEO of Metadata.io. This podcast is all about sharing the real and sometimes edgy secrets of B2B software creation. On today's episode, we have Michel Feaster, founder and CEO of Usermind, Nick Mehta, CEO at Gainsight, and Mike Volpe, CEO of Lola.com.
Welcome everyone to the Category Creator Podcast. My name is Gil Allouche. I'm the founder and CEO of Metadata. I have together with me Michel Feaster, Nick Mehta, and Mike Volpe. Maybe we will start with Michel because you're first on the Zoom video. Maybe you can introduce yourself quickly, who you are and about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Gil. I'm Michel Feaster. I'm the founder and CEO of Usermind. And this is the fourth category I've created in my software career. So I'm kind of a hybrid product manager, product marketing geek. I've spent my life building software for big companies. Usermind, I've been at building my company now. It's my first company, about 7 years. And we've helped create a new category called Journey Orchestration, which is really about kind of modern customer engagement across the full life cycle. So super excited to be here, Gil. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you very much for coming. And a small fact that I learned about you this week is that you worked for Ben Horowitz. And so it's very interesting to me, particularly because I finished the 2 books that he wrote, the most recent about culture. So a lot of very interesting experiences, I'm sure, you've had in your career with him.
Yeah, I helped acquire his and Mark's last company, Opsware. And so he joined HP Software and became my boss. And he's why we're talking. He told me I was a crazy entrepreneur and what the heck was I doing in a big company. So I'm here today meeting all of you because of him. So happy to share any stories.
That's an amazing anecdote. Cool. Nick Mehta, the man, the legend. Definitely heard about you many times and very, very excited to have you on the podcast. Although you're very well known, still maybe you can give us the 1 minute overview of who you are and what you do.
Sure. Yeah. Hey, everyone. Nick Mehta, CEO of Gainsight. Gainsight, we're helping businesses in the subscription and cloud-based models optimize net dollar retention by doing everything from managing and scaling CSM teams to making your products easier to adopt to driving higher renewals and cross-sell, upsell.
Awesome. And Nick, one thing I've heard about you over and over and over from many people who know you and work with you is that you are a very good CEO, like a good person who establishes a good culture. So very excited to learn how a company can succeed and grow so fast and still, institute a good culture and, a good people person. Very excited to learn about that. And last but not least, Mike Volpe, also very well known, but maybe you can give us a little bit of your background from HubSpot as well as the current company you're with.
Yeah, sure. I'm Mike Volpe. I'm the CEO at Lola.com. We do spend and travel management. So we help CFOs get control and visibility over all of the spending within their company, whether that be travel, expense, or just marketing budgets and things like that. And I've worked in the SaaS industry for a long time, including, as Gil was alluding to, as part of the early, just after the 2 founders at HubSpot. I was like the next person hired after that and was there for 8.5 years. And also a little time in cybersecurity and some other stuff as well.
Amazing. Well, thank you all 3 again for joining. Very interesting conversation today. I would like to start us off maybe with a basic question that I always like to start with, and that is, in a category creation journey, what was the biggest #fail moment? Not the successful, big, romantic story you tell on SaaStr, but exactly the opposite, the one that you try to never, ever talk about. Nick, you're unmuted, so we'll start with you.
All right. So many. Gosh, I have like way more mistakes than successes. I'll try to pick one. I think in creating a category, one challenge is planning is very hard because it's hard to know how quickly things are going to evolve. So you kind of are like, oh, the category is going to be here, and just you like the classic Silicon Valley playbook. You hire a bunch of people, you raise a lot of money, and then it's like, okay, no, they're not ready yet. And then you are over your skis, and then you have to slow down and all that kind of stuff. So that fits and starts of how your business goes. And like getting the timing right on hiring and planning versus like in a existing category, there's often this like mythical spreadsheet of, oh, okay, every sales rep generates this much in bookings. So if you want to do $1 billion, just hire 1,000 sales reps. It's very easy. It's amazing. And maybe that works for Snowflake, but it doesn't actually work for people trying to create a category, I think.
Anything to add, Michelle?
100% agree with that. Gosh, Nick, I've lived that struggle. Well, I would say one of our biggest challenges was figuring out who the buyer was. So when, we started our company, we thought that customer experience teams would be the people thinking about journeys end to end, and they certainly were, but they weren't really the buyer for my technology. And so we really struggled. In addition to what Nick described, we actually struggled to figure out our whole go-to-market motion. If you don't know which persona you're targeting and who's kind of the core buyer every day that is really the buyer and user of your technology, the whole entire outbound motion is very, very challenging to build. So I'd say today, we figured out our buyers digital, and we understand kind of our ideal customer profile and what elements need to be in place for someone to be ready for Usermind and ready for Journey Orchestration. But holy hell, that was just so hard for us. And I think we wasted money and we ran so many experiments, and we just had to be comfortable that we were wrong half the time. So I'd say that's the second challenge we had, in addition to the one Nick was describing.
I'm curious, Michelle and Nick, if you had this other challenge, which I felt like in the very beginning, we were the only ones talking about this new category. And to use I'm a Boston guy. I've always worked at Boston companies. I felt like I was on a soapbox in Harvard Square, yelling and screaming at the top of my lungs about inbound marketing, and everyone's just walking by, going about their business and not paying attention.
Yeah.
And it took like a long time before a couple people stop, and then people see that people stop, so they stop, and then eventually down the block, you hear somebody else yelling and screaming about the same thing. And you're like, oh, like it's finally working. But I felt like it was a extraordinarily long time of just screaming into a black hole before you felt like you got any feedback. Did you two feel that?
Only on days that ended in Y, like only on yeah. I honestly, that whole idea of like, is this just me? Am I pushing a rock, the Sisyphus pushing the rock uphill? I mean, totally, Mike. And like, and it sounds like Michelle might have experienced that too. And I think for me, the thing that like, that whole idea that like, am I wrong? Like, is this really going to happen? And all that, like all the doubts. One of the things I would always tell myself was, okay, let's go back to first principles in our business. Okay, in the future, will there be more or fewer cloud and SaaS businesses? I'm like, I think more. They're not going to be fewer. And will cloud or SaaS businesses need to have customer success to manage their customers? I think yes. So if people don't believe now, it's just because like the future hasn't happened yet. So that's what I would try to tell myself to not feel like a crazy person.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with that. I called it the years of wandering in the wilderness, Mike, where I remember never forget my first demo at an Andreessen EBC to like AT&T, and they were just like, no one needs what you did. No one cares about journeys. Yeah. Like no one has enough cloud technology to need orchestration across ad tech and MarTech and CRM, et cetera. But, I don't know about your evolution, but I found our whole early, life was finding these occasional visionaries where, you might have 100 conversations, and then, eventually one person would just be like, this is obvious. And so, until the category crosses, and I think Jeffrey Moore is really right, until becomes more mainstream. And I think we've been very blessed in the last year, our ideas become mainstream, and, Adobe launched a product in our space. There's a lot of validation, and Nick, I'm sure you guys must feel so much, better. Like your idea just seems so clear today. But man, for a long time, I just lived on those occasional visionaries where I was just like, I gotta believe that they're right, and I'm not the only one who sees it right; they see it. So well said. That was for sure a feature of the first 5 years.
Yeah, and I think paired with that, the other challenge we had was a lot of feedback in the early days that the market was too small.
Yeah.
Right?
100%.
And anytime you're creating a market, I feel like, well, by definition, today it's small, but it's going to be like, it's the future and it's going to be giant. And you have to believe that this thing should exist. And also sort of the corollary is that it's going to be way, way bigger than anyone can imagine. Right. And I would actually guess, I know your product's less, Michelle, but Nick, I know your world like well, and I would guess you got a lot of that in the early days.
Oh my God. Yeah. All the time. And actually, especially like, fundraising and stuff like that, right? Where it's kind of that litmus test and mirror in front of you. And you get the same question over and over again, what's the TAM and things like that. And, and you have to sort of almost just get good at answering the question without really having a quantitative Gartner report or something to point to. But Mike, that's like 100%. Yeah. And honestly, in some ways, I think that never goes away because your ambition goes up too. So and that's why it is super inspiring to see HubSpot at $20 billion market cap and whatever. Like, it's like, okay, eventually does work. Like, I mean, it's pretty cool to see people that are ahead that it's like, they did it, got through the desert, as you said, Michelle. So, yeah.
And what is that answer? Is the answer what Michelle mentioned before, which is obviously it's small now and we're creating category and it's going to be huge and grow? Is that the answer you give to the VC when they tell you it's not there currently?
I think that for me, it's the first principles. Like, it's like, okay, whatever the markets are now for stuff is not interesting. What's interesting is like, where's the puck going? And it's like, first principles, are there going to be more SaaS business or less? And are they going to need to worry about it? I think something like that. But honestly, I feel like I actually think investors are getting a better handle on that, because a lot of great companies are in TAMs that didn't exist 5 years ago, right? So I kind of think it's changing, but some people have that old fixed mindset from before, I think.
I think that's right. I think there's probably something more of like, I mean, our A round at HubSpot was like almost 14 years ago now.
Right.
I think back then it was like more of a thing. And it was like, and again, it was the same thing, Nick. It was like, okay, there's a lot of small businesses. You agree with that, right? And they're like, oh yeah, there's tons of small businesses. And okay, well, the way they're doing marketing is probably going to change over time because it'd be more about the internet and all these things. Are like, okay, yeah, right. And you're like, okay, well, 1 + 1 = what? And you kind of just like put them together. I don't know. Did you, Michelle, any techniques that you use kind of just like solve this problem with people early on?
Yeah, I think we were lucky in that sense. We never really got that your TAM isn't big enough. If you think about the idea that, all Fortune 2000 companies, have a need to connect together all the life cycle of their customer communications. No one ever said, hey, 5 to 10 billion isn't enough. And it was pretty easy to size. But, we definitely got the pushback, like, is there a category at all? Like, if you don't know who your buyer is, because I couldn't say, I didn't, I wasn't sure, maybe Nick, this is something you lived. Like, when we started, marketing didn't care about all the full life cycle,
right.
And digital didn't really exist. And actually, customer success would be a champion for us, but didn't necessarily own the full journey either. And so, my biggest challenge was that buying center. Everybody was like, well, we get that your TAM's big, but like, if your buyer never emerges, you can't actually get to the TAM. And so that was always my challenge. Never really conceptual, never really, market size based, more like, do they believe me that someone's ever going to own this and buy it? So I think, it's a similar challenge, right? People aren't going to give you money if they don't believe you can go sell it. But it was much more persona based.
Yeah, I think that persona thing is so big because they do emerge, right? I'm sure it's emerged for you now. It sounds like, Michelle, it has. Yeah. And it's like, for us, obviously we had a well-defined one, but a tiny, there were like 500 CSMs in the world when we launched, something like that. I didn't actually know at the time, but later on we were able to see the LinkedIn data. And we're like, why did we ever do this company? Because there wasn't enough, but we knew they're going to grow. And there's like, 150,000 or something now. And so it's, but yeah, like that person that is passionate goes back to your point about the visionaries, right? It's what's that small group of people that actually do think differently, and hopefully there'll be more.
When you mentioned the Jeffrey Moore, the crossing the chasm, the visionary, the early adopters, very, very early in our stage, we have something like 15 of our 120 customers are investor in the company. And for me, every time that happens, I am in cloud nine, because that's exactly for me what I'm holding to against all the rest of the reasons why not to do this. How long did it take you when you were at that stage, kind of still questioning yourself, but holding on to those visionaries until that moment where you had the first signal that this trend that you were talking about for years is happening? The market is converging to where you thought it's happening.
I mean, so we've been at this journey almost 7 years. And I think our one big compelling point, we've been working at Forrester for years. And Joanna told us she's going to write a wave, right? First, she wrote a market scope or a market note or whatever it was. And it was like, hallelujah. I mean, this is what you need. You need an analyst firm to kind of help the broader market digest the idea. So that was one just turning point. We thought, maybe this thing will start to happen. And I would say the second one was 2020 for us. Both Adobe dropped a product, and I think that was a huge validation. It doesn't work well, but it, caused a lot of people to say, oh, JO is the next thing. And then, I think COVID just drove a ton of dollars into digital and really coalesced our buying center. So I feel like for me, there were 2 points. The wave is like the hope moment that it's going to happen. And then I feel like last year was the year it was like, okay, it's happening. But yeah. scary moments otherwise.
I love those, Michelle. Those both resonate, and the COVID one especially. The thing I'd add in for me, because I think people talk about product market fit and all these things like it's a line you cross and everything's magic and rainbows afterwards, and before it was so hard. So there's very few binary moments in Gainsight history like that I can really remember. It's all been challenging and hard and fun and rewarding and everything at the same time. But there was, what I do remember was the first time we closed a 6-figure ACV deal that I wasn't involved in at all. And that was like, wow, I didn't talk to that customer at all. I didn't even know they're talking to us. And it just came in on Salesforce. And I was like, okay, that's cool. How do we have more of that? And so now we definitely have a lot more of that. And so that kind of like feeling of like, it's not, you've created a little bit of a machine and it's not 100% dependent on you. I think as an entrepreneur, that's something for me that's been interesting.
We definitely saw the over time, like competitors kind of at least pick up your messaging. Maybe don't launch a whole product. Maybe they repackage a couple of features and call it something new, but then they claim to have this thing, which that means you're in a lot of their deals, and they feel like they're losing deals because you have this thing that they don't have. I also think that for us early on, a lot of it too was just other people starting to write about the same concept, even small, industry people on blogs and things like that, people that had read your stuff long enough that they're like starting to nod, and then they're doing their own stuff on those same themes and using those same terms. We used to track how many people put inbound marketing in their job title on LinkedIn and like all sorts of things like that around, how much is this having an impact on like the world of marketers in that community? And those were things that after a certain period of time, you start to see that kind of snowball start to roll, and it gets very exciting then.
I think that's interesting, just connecting the dots of both of yours, because I do think there's this thing of when did the big companies or bigger companies try to pretend to be in the market, like Mike was just saying, and Michelle, I think what you're saying with Adobe as well, right? Obviously, I'm not judging either the companies, but just I'm sure it's like some mix of scariness and validation at the same time, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's always scary because you're like, oh my God, did it just change the landscape and the bar in a way that changes the trajectory of the company? And then on the other hand, it's beyond exciting because you see this giant, marketing machine pouring money into this idea. You've been kind of this little voice, the engine that could, right, going up the hill. So, I think we've been massively more excited than concerned, but it's just a validation point. Like if one of the top, kind of marketing and customer engagement companies in the world is saying, hey, Journey Orchestration is the next thing that you need, that's been, I think on balance, much more good than bad for us. Cool moments, definitely cool moments.
Let's cheer to that. I like that. I'm going to pour myself another one. Let's take a moment.
Cheers.
Cheers, everyone. Happy Friday.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Particularly in category creation, I'm interested to learn from the three of you. If you had to distill, 3 to 5 of the factors that were, in orders of magnitude, they were like exponential, that really changed the direction for you. And, I did some research. I remember with HubSpot, if I'm not mistaken, I'm a customer for maybe a decade now. I remember when you had, when HubSpot had the website ranker, I think, or ranking tool that was a freebie that I looked somewhere, and I think
Website Grader,
Website Grader. There's like hundreds of thousands of downloads. Someone told me that you got maybe in the millions today. And there was the certification program that became extremely successful, the inbound.org. Can you, maybe Mike, maybe you can start. Maybe you can tell us about some of those well-known and less-known elements.
I think especially if you're selling into the SMB world, there's rarely like a lightning strike that just ignites everything. I've lived that a little bit in the enterprise, and you sign that multi-million-dollar deal, or your first, $5 million, maybe it's a $10 million 3-year deal. Those can be like, wow. It doesn't exist as much in the SMB, and the SMB is much more about, climbing Kilimanjaro, and it's one step at a time. And maybe your pace quickens like a little bit, but there's nothing that accelerates you 1,000 feet. So for us, it was a lot of things. It was like Website Grader was super successful in the early days, and over time just got used, more and more and more. Our blog and all of our content, our SEO really grew a ton, especially in the early days. In little things, it's like the first webinar we ever did, we used all the email addresses we were gathering from Website Grader. So we actually had a good, healthy list to build off of. And we got 500 people to sign up for a webinar, which is great for an early small company. Whole company was maybe 15 people at the time. So you're like, okay, there's something here. And then it was like a couple years later, we kept growing and growing. And we actually had a webinar about using Twitter for marketing. And this is back in like late 07, maybe early 08, something like that. And we had something that was like 5,000 people signed up for it. And so but again, none of those one things like completely changed the trajectory of the business. It's just like you're kind of building off the success and like growing over time. So it's like you're building a giant cathedral, but it's one brick at a time. And you're just, you hire a couple more people so you can lay a couple more bricks every day. And but it's just, it really is this kind of like incremental thing. The good part about that is there's usually no one thing that can totally stop you in your tracks either. But it can be frustrating because I think it can be a little slower to get going, to be honest.
And how do you set the foundation or the culture, or I don't know, that creative environment in HubSpot in the early days, so that someone comes up with the website rank, like with that tool? How does that happen?
Yeah, I mean that particular one was Dharmesh, one of the co-founders, and so that was lucky because he was a dangerous enough coder that he could kind of build the alpha version of it himself and sort of proof of concept and things like that. And we started to do a little marketing around it. It got a lot of traction. But I think what we tried to do early on, at least there, was have a strong culture of ownership, a strong culture of allowing people to have some goals, but sort of figure out how they wanted to meet those goals, and just overall like a really strong entrepreneurial culture. I even think back to today, about half of the revenue at HubSpot comes through channel. So marketing partners, marketing agencies around the world, half of the revenue, and it's like, I don't know, billion plus run rate of revenue now, all very small SaaS deals, right? It's interesting. But the first rep who wanted to do some partner deals, we told them no. We said, this is a bad idea. Come on, it's SaaS. Like the internet's about disintermediation. Like, why would anybody buy from someone else? And like the margin and then this, and like just like go direct. Like, it makes no sense. Like that's old school. That's, enterprise license. Like why? It doesn't make any sense. And continuously just told him no. And finally, like he just started doing it. And we finally had to sit down and tell him, it's like, well, if you keep hitting your quota, like this is fine. But like the second you miss your quota, like you're not doing this anymore. And he just kept crushing his quota. And then we said, okay, you can hire a couple people and hire a couple more. And this guy's Pete Caputa. It's sort of a well-known story within the walls of HubSpot. And he ended up being like VP of sales, like number 2, driving tons of revenue through the IPO, everything. He's CEO of DataBox now. And built a gigantic portion of the organization, and did something that not only was it entrepreneurial, but we told him not to do it. We told him it was a stupid idea, right? And so we built enough independence there that the CMO, the CEO, Halligan was telling me this, like we could tell him it's a stupid idea, don't do it. And he still did it and still made it work, right? So in some ways, especially early on, it was kind of just a special place culturally, but there were lots of weird examples of things like that.
That is a badass example. That's amazing. Nick Mehta, I remember talking to Anthony Canada maybe 4 years ago, and he was raving about, he was mentioning looking for CSM on LinkedIn to see that curve grow. So I don't know how OG was at Gainsight, but he definitely knew about that one. And then he mentioned to me how the big story, like, yeah, there was the marketing dollars were there, but creating a community that didn't exist before, making the customer success person who historically was a lesser, citizen in the organization, suddenly became a hero, and you gave them like, a voice and a platform. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, totally. But Anthony, who's our first CMO and is OG, is almost like a co-founder. He's amazing. There's I think 3 things, because trying to give like kind of some things that are a little more practical and tactical that fall into 3 different buckets, I think, of category creation, probably fit in all the other narratives too. One of them was clearly just like evangelizing. Like, I mean, I've definitely, you cannot avoid me talking about customer success somewhere in the world. Pretty much everyone's seen it, whether they like it or not. And so I think this idea that like having evangelists who are passionate, and not just me, by the way, like, so our first head of CS was a guy named Dan Steinman. He did a ton of evangelism about it. Our chief, we've had a couple different chief customer officers over the years. They've done a lot of it. They've written books. I've written books. And so the first thing is like evangelism, but like not just like big, like your big conference, but like literally I've done hundreds and hundreds of all hands meetings for customers talking about customer success or prospects or whatever, right? Like literally to tons of companies. Just, hey, let me talk about customers, not about Gainsight. I've done obviously, hundreds of podcasts, and it's all this stuff where you're just talking about just like the category, not your company. So that's like one. But it's not this, just like Mike said, it's Mount Kilimanjaro. It is just like one at a time. It's not like you just, I mean, eventually maybe you get some big stage, but initially it's all these little stages. The second thing I think that's worked really well for us is focusing on people's careers in the community, because you're trying to build this community of people. And right, we were existentially tied to the growth of the CS community. So I spent a lot of time, we all did, on everything around careers. So everything from like best practice content on compensation, organization, all that, to just like helping people in their careers, like creating job boards and like internship programs. And literally I've helped hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of CS leaders find jobs where I introduce them to other people, whatever. And then like advocating for them in that like career dimension. Like yesterday, my tweet, which was probably like, I'm sure it's like very self-serving, but I said, it's life's too short if you're a CS leader to work for a CEO that doesn't believe in customer success, right? So things like that, like just like advocating for it. And then the third kind of chapter, so we talked about evangelism, kind of the career side. The third thing was actually really just bringing our culture and personality to our community. I think HubSpot does an amazing job of this too. Like, it's just like, there's no wall between Gainsight and our community. It's like the same, like whatever silliness and goofiness and music videos and rap videos and all that stuff. It's just like, it's all just who we are, and everyone knows it. And it's like exactly what they expect. And that's been incredible. And like some of it's funny and some of it's like vulnerability. Like I talked at our Pulse conference about being lonely as a kid in front of like 4,000 people and all this stuff like that really just bonds people. Like, I feel like there's this belief that your company culture should be different from how you show up in front of your customers. It's the opposite for us. So
super insightful. Michelle, what helped you? What's your secret sauce to creating a category?
Well, I mean, I definitely agree with, kind of both what Mike and Nick have said. Like, there's not any one moment, right? It's a bunch of just, you grind out wins and you keep learning and kind of trying to stay humble and iterate. When I started the company, and I have this belief, I think categories are made when there's kind of multiple big changes hitting the same persona or the same kind of function in a company. And it's kind of my core belief of like, is it a product or is it a category? And so when I thought, even back to the early days of thinking about Usermind, it was this kind of notion that everything was going digital, more and more software innovation and tech was being purchased by the front office, by marketing and sales and customer success. And, my hypothesis was those folks weren't going to go look to IT to manage the tech. And as a result, there would be this kind of, similar to the CSM, there'd be this operations team, marketing ops, sales ops, customer success operations to manage the tech. And I was super convinced that those people didn't have that role 20 years ago or even 10 years ago, and that no one was really focused on them. And that if I just interviewed enough of them, I'd find a problem. And so I would say, to me, that's always kind of my central bar, is like, can you find somebody where enough, changes to their daily working life are happening that the from to is big enough to require a mental shift and a category. And that's really what a category shift is to me. A category shift is like the old way no longer works, and or there's so much change that there's an opportunity for a new and better way. And Nick alluded to this in his description of kind of the market opportunity, is like every business realizes subscription is the single most profitable model in the world. Every enterprise software company in that, every enterprise company is becoming, look at Disney, right? Everyone's becoming a subscription company, and therefore everyone gets focused on LTV. And if you look at that, like, man, that's huge, right? And I don't, Mike, I don't understand your world nearly as well, but, I always had the confidence that was correct. And I would say, maybe another challenge or thing I learned along the way is I had to be maniacally believing that was true, that journeys would come, that life cycles would get here. And yet on the flip side, really, really humble to try to figure out, is there signal in the negative feedback I'm getting? And so sometimes you get this feedback that like, you're crazy, and you just have to realize like, that's wrong. And sometimes in that feedback of like, it's not quite right, or our positioning isn't right, there's this like nugget of learning to get closer to like how to win the deal, or how to build the product, or how to explain it. So, I think that was a learning for me as a first-time founder. I'd never really had that true experience. And it was a thing I think that I think about a lot is, what is like true belief, and where is there room to just keep being humble and iterating. And then the other thing my personal opinion is not all customers are equal. And what I mean by that is some customers that you close are truly visionaries. And regardless of your technology, they are in their company pushing the envelope and they are trying to create a new reality that only they see. And I have found in my career, even back when I was at Mercury Interactive building testing tools during the Opsware deal, like there's that subset of customers that lead you in the right direction. And so I've always tried to collect those people and learn from them and listen to them and, help them shape my direction. And I feel like, my last startup was Aptio, and we probably had there's a giant council now, but like in the early days, there were 3 or 4 CIOs who were just so ahead of where we were, and they were just so great at helping us shape our product direction. So, I mean, that I would say probably those are the 3 things that have, if I look back, have kind of gotten me through it, with, a million mistakes along the way.
Cheers to that. Million mistakes along the way. That's cool. You all mentioned a lot of things they seem very reasonable and make sense, like balancing act between being a crazy, insane entrepreneur with conviction. You're wrong. What are you talking about? I know what I'm doing. Between like the humble nuggets of insights. I mean, it sounds easy, but it's not. And being vulnerable also in front of a big audience and talking about your childhood and a bunch of other things. It works. Like I have a really small anecdotal evidence about it with my own team, but I definitely haven't done that publicly on LinkedIn. And so how do you like what gets you this for all 3 of you, what's the moment that, I don't know, psychologically, emotionally gets you to take that leap of faith on an action that is maybe abnormal for a regular person, but when you look back, it's like, that was a great moment for me to do that because I came out genuine and authentic, and that changed the perception of myself and the company.
I can share a little bit of that for our journey, which is, I mean, it's so in us, in what I was referring to, kind of trying to be a little vulnerable with, in this case, the customer base and all that. It was obviously not the person who came up with that idea. Brene Brown and many others sort of pioneered this concept. But for me, it's been like every time I have an opportunity to kind of put myself out there, how do I go a little further? Right. So just get a little like, get a little more human. We talk about our kind of philosophy is like human first business. That's a thing we're really passionate about. And so, what happened was like in the early days of Gainsight, it was literally just talking about, hey, I'm into the Pittsburgh Steelers as a football fan, right? Like that's like, oh, that's human, right? A little bit, right? And then it's like, okay, let me talk about my kids. And it's like, okay, and you just keep doing a little bit more, right? And there was, so our company purpose statement is we want to be living proof you can win in business while being human first. That's actually like what motivates us more than just like software or whatever. So anyways, when we came up with that statement, we were launching it at our internal kind of kickoff, like get everyone together. And I basically was like, let me try to be human first and be vulnerable. And so I talked about some of this childhood stuff, and then it really resonated. And so then I tried that at the Pulse conference, and then that worked. And then I did it again the next year for our employees, and that worked. And then I did something even more the next year with the conference, and it worked. And so you just like do it and it works. And then you go a little further, and every time then you want to one up yourself. So yeah, it's sort of like a progressive process for me.
Very helpful. Mike, do you have something similar that happened to you, that you did small marginal improvements on being that, making those taking those risks?
We were fortunate that we were marketing to marketers in the age of the internet and personalization and social media, and self-publishing was kind of coming alive. And so it's much more commonplace today, but I think doing, we did a weekly live video show that was, streamed and also recorded and archived for years, a couple years. Podcasting, videos on YouTube, the use of social media as a company and as executives and things like that. We were, it was our business to do that and to be first or near first in many of those things. And I think we really embraced all of that. And it wasn't just 1 or 2 people. Like I think previous to that, the idea was that a company would have kind of a spokesperson, and the way Tesla has Elon Musk, that every company had like their person. But Nick alluded to this earlier. I think it's much more powerful when you have a lot of people that are those evangelists from the company, and they can all bring their own sort of style, and even some of their own sort of slightly different opinions on the topic that you're evangelizing. And I think we were lucky that early on we had a lot of people that could be effectively those evangelists and sort of could capitalize on a lot of those new mediums that were popping up. And I think it was really across the team that we were lucky that it wasn't, I was out there, Brian was out there, Dharmesh was out there, Mark Roberts was out there, and even like a whole host of other folks as well. And I think that just having that vulnerability and that sort of accessibility spread across a lot of people on the team was very helpful for us.
Thank you. Michelle, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I think it sounds like all of us had different journeys to the same thing. I totally agree with Nick. I love Brene Brown, but I read it later. I started the company and I'd never been a CEO before. And, Andreessen did our Series A. And I don't know about other people in the early days of founding, but I had no idea if my idea was any good. And I felt like an imposter and I didn't know how to be a CEO. And, I ended up, and I'm a very generally positive person, I'm always kind of can do, upbeat. And I remember kind of going home and just like drinking wine and playing video games and being like, I am not my normal self right now. And I ended up starting therapy and like really came to realize that as a CEO, kind of my strengths are in many ways, they affect the company's strengths, but my weaknesses and my own interpersonal struggles and challenges, that affected the culture. And so I think as I understood that, I didn't know how to really separate my personal ability to like be successful and manage my emotions and manage the stress and manage the down days from my ability to like lead the team and be successful. And so I think for me that my insight was like, I needed to be open because I needed grace from people, at times for them to understand that, yes, I'm the CEO and I'm the founder and I'm doing my best to kind of lead the company, but that, we're all human. And I feel like the net effect of that is it's given other people room to be human. And, I always say to my team, we don't need to be perfect as people. We can be perfect as a team. And, that's that's a line from that Denzel Washington football movie. And I'm forgetting.
Remember the
Titans, right? But I was always very struck by that. And I'd never heard, Nick, that expression of human first business, but honestly, I think we'd all be so much better off if we could live that because we're all just people. We all make mistakes and we don't need to be perfect. We just need to pick each other up as a team and manage through the challenge that we're facing. So, I think I just kind of came to it by necessity. I wasn't, able to kind of manage through the stress of founding and the early days and the hardships in the company without being real about it. I didn't know any other way to manage it. And now I look back and think, God, it was one of the greatest gifts I've been given. I always say to people ask me, how do you feel about your founding journey? And I always say to people, it's the hardest thing I've ever done. But it's made me a much better human. Like I feel that I've become a deeper human. I hope a wiser human, a better leader. And even if the company weren't to succeed, I would count my chapter of life as successful for just that reason. I think I've learned more about being a human in the last 7 years than like in the whole rest of my life put together. So, I just think I had to do it. I didn't have a choice, and it's been the best thing I've ever done.
Love that attitude. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Really cool.
It is awesome. It's very interesting to always see the most successful people that are good at their job and leading big organization and doing the inevitable, being the humble, vulnerable people. It's interesting. Change of gears. I want to hear, if you'll share it with me, something that no one knows about you, ideally very embarrassing. I'll give you an example. Goddard Abel, CEO of G2, shared about getting arrested. That was an interesting story. You can listen to it later. And we have a bunch of others. I'd love to hear, something that not everyone knows about you that is doesn't have to be like like super vulnerable, but a story that no one knows that is embarrassing about you as a person outside of the CEO founder usual story track.
The list is long and there's many, but I have one that definitely comes to mind. It was a very long time ago, but I threw up on a date. Like not during a date, but on the date.
That is amazing.
Very long time ago.
There was no video back then, though. Was it?
I mean, no, pre-video, pre-internet.
That's amazing.
Yeah, like late teenage years.
Wow.
It was like a long day. it was like four of us, a friend of mine and a girl he had like just barely started dating, and then one of her friends, and he like hooked us up, and we went to like a town fair, like the old school like amusement park. And I'm not good with motion rides, and she wanted to go on the tilt-a-whirl. And, like a sucker, I'm like, oh yeah, that'd be great. Like I could do this, right? And, halfway through, like I'm puking, like we're spinning around. So you got like centrifugal force happening and all kinds of stuff. And, just not a good scene. I felt horrible. And she's screaming like, stop the ride, stop the ride. Like the guy hits the button, like stops the ride. And he just walks over with like an almost empty roll of paper towel, like just like 4 sheets left on it, hands it to me and just shakes his head and just walks away.
That's so funny. I always wondered if somebody ever threw up on those twisty rides, and I guess the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So we have 2 kids in now. My wife and I, not her, different. We didn't get married. never talked to that woman again. But no, when we go to the amusement park with like the kids, she's in charge of all those kind of rides. So, yeah.
That's a brave story to share. Thank you. I hope your friend in the double date did better or did not hate you.
I think everyone's fine now. Hopefully no one's scarred, but yeah.
That's hilarious. Nick, you're next.
Well, it's not nearly as funny. That's a hilarious story, Mike. But I guess a vulnerable / embarrassing. And most of my embarrassments are all online. So, but unfortunately, that means people don't. So this one, I guess, I don't know if I ever told people this specific story, which is I mentioned that I, never really felt like I fit in as a kid. And, it was kind of, I was the kid who ate alone every day from kindergarten to 12th grade and just never had really friends or whatever. And so obviously my life's changed, but that's sort of where I was. And, but I was like the worst, like, kid to my parents because of that, because I always wanted to be with the popular kids. Right. So I really wanted to. So what I remember is like, literally, like I would just like stalk like what they're doing and want to do everything that they did, because that would somehow get me popular, like listen to whatever music they were listening to or whatever. And I remember that like we were middle class, not, not poor, not rich, just like normal, like middle class. And I remember, and my parents were not, they're Indian American, so they were definitely thrifty. And I remember like the kids in high school were wearing the like Ralph Lauren polo, whatever. Right. And I was so obsessed with like my parents getting me those things, right? Which are like, it's like a $100 shirt, which for us was like, could not imagine buying that. We shopped at whatever the equivalent of his Target was back then. And so I remember I was just like the most annoying kid, like, cause I felt unpopular and I wanted to be popular and I wanted to buy my way into it. So I remember dragging my mom to like the polo store and buying that one like thing, and just like later on being totally embarrassed of myself. Now that we have kids, I'm like, I hope our kids don't end up like that.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that. Michelle, you probably got some time to think about your most embarrassing story.
Yeah, I mean, not most embarrassing, but one that I haven't told. I was in pre-sales years ago. That's how when I first got into tech, that was what I was doing. And I remember I had just joined Mercury Interactive, and I went to my first sales kickoff in San Francisco. And this is at the time, if anyone's been to that Hyatt with the funky roof and like the weird open right downtown, it was there, and it was my first time in San Francisco. And, I didn't know anybody, right? I've been with the company like freaking 3 weeks. So we're all standing in the lobby, and the sales reps, of course, inciting trouble, ask everyone to play the "Who Would You Sleep With" game. And public knowledge, I'm gay, and I was like, there are no women here, so like I don't know how to answer this question. There are literally like 2 women in this whole sales kickoff, and they were like, no, you have to answer. And so finally I was like, oh, I don't know, and then I was like, I got it. I would sleep with Amnon. He was the CEO, and all of a sudden everyone was like, shh, be quiet, shh. And I'm like, no. I was like so excited. I got it. I got one. It's Amnon. I would sleep with Amnon. And he was directly behind me. He was literally, the CEO of the company was literally 2 inches from me with his back to me, hearing me shout that I would sleep with him. And I didn't even know him. I had like been in the company like 12 days. And years later, we got acquired by HP, and we were doing our last Christmas party in San Francisco in the city hall. We were doing it there. And I finally met his wife, and he told the story to her that the first time he met me, that was what he heard. And so he played it off. He didn't make me embarrassed at the time, but
wow.
Oh my God. Anyway, kind of hilarious. He was a great guy. He was an incredible leader. He led the company from, 2 employees to 3,000 and $1 billion of revenue. And, one of the greatest CEOs I've ever worked for, but talk about a horrible way to get introduced. So
That's amazing. Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
You
I
must
saw
be
Mike's
pretty good. You
shaking
must be
his
pretty
hand.
good if it kept you there, right? So that's
Luckily,
you.
I turned out to be a pretty good pre-sales person.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
my
he also
God.
probably remembered who you were. Like that's the other.
Yeah.
That's embarrassing, but like never going to forget you. So yeah.
He was always great to me, but
Yeah.
oh my God, talk about you want to just fall on a sword or something. I mean,
I know, Michelle, you worked with Ben Horowitz for quite some time. You mentioned him as a mentor. I'd like to start with you. For me, mentors, advisors, one have become my board member. I have a CEO coach, have been a huge dramatic improvement in my capabilities as a CEO and as a human, honestly, because it kind of intertwines. So can you tell us a little bit, maybe like a highlight, something that changed your trajectory, changed your life, a comment, I don't know, a mantra?
I mean, Ben's amazing. First of all, he's one of the best human beings I've ever met in my life. If you've read his book or met him, he like comes off as humble. He literally is like incredible family man, incredible human being. Just man, he's someone who if I could be as like him, as good a human as him, I would be very proud of myself at the end of my days. But yeah, no, he's told me a bunch of hilarious things that have been helpful and changed my life. I remember I had left HP and I was moving up to Seattle to take my first startup gig. So I joined a company called Aptio as employee 17 and running product. And I had never been in a company so small, and I was moving cross country. I didn't know anybody in Seattle, and I'd never been an exec before. And I remember calling him and I'm like, Ben, they say that like these 3 things are like I'm doing the 3 most stressful things at the same time. Oh, when I was breaking up with my girlfriend. So that was the 3rd one. And he said to me, Michelle, for some people, maximum discomfort means maximum growth. And you're one of those people. And like, honestly, if I look at all the best, like all of the things that have helped me grow the most, they're all things that scared me initially. They were all things that caused great discomfort. And frankly, I look at myself and I've become a different person by going through those experiences. But when I look at people, when I think about hiring, that's a thing I ask myself, like, is this person a person who will thrive in discomfort? Because I think unless you are that person, it's very hard to succeed in startups because so much of what we do is defined by like problem solving. So that's kind of one piece of advice he gave me that changed my life. Maybe the other thing is he once told me, this is in my time at HP. So Mercury was a very direct culture, and we were acquired into HP, which was a much more careful culture and a much more hierarchical culture and a politically correct culture. And, I don't know that either is good or bad, but it was very hard for me to norm into that culture. And I remember Ben, one-on-one saying to me, do you have to verbally punch people in the face all the time? He said, you have to ask yourself, is it better to be right or is it better to be effective? Honestly, it's taken me years to internalize that and like grow enough to become more deft at bringing people around to my point of view, being more open, listening better. I mean, there's a whole lot you could unpack in that comment, but he's just been a great gift. And maybe one more thing he said to me, which is just amazing. He once said, some people look at you and see your flaws. I look at you and see your beauty. And so you just think about that as a mentor, like what better, anything he tells me, I listen to because I know he's trying to help me be better. Like his intent is so good. He wants the best for me and to see the best for me, but he's also cares about me enough to give me that uncomfortable feedback or that encouragement, like whatever it is I'm needing at that moment. So those are just some examples. I could probably give you like 50 more, but he's been an incredible force in my life. And he's often, when I have a really hard problem or something I'm struggling with, I'll go to him and there's always something he says, like the 3 I gave you, that just sticks with me and is a tool I take beyond the one conversation I had with him. So he's amazing.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. That's pretty amazing. I see a lot of that in some of the humbleness that you're showing here in this conversation, whatever it's worth. Nick, Mehta, you're next. Tell us, do you have like, coaches or mentors that help you curve the path?
Yeah, so I haven't. So I've had. I feel like I've learned from so many different people. So I've had. I'd say that if I kind of divided it up, I have one thing that's been amazing is I'm in a CEO group called YPO, and that's like just the peer-to-peer, like honestly, just talking about your life and your fears and all that with people that you can be really candid with. That's been like the most important thing for me by far. And then for people that I've worked with and met, I've learned from everyone. Like I've learned from like, there's so much to learn. Like, you know, Brian Halligan, CEO of HubSpot, such a thoughtful, introspective person. Right. And, you know, obviously I've never met Mark Benioff, but watching what he does with Salesforce, the way he can market his company, and, you know, reading Ben Horowitz's book, and like, there's just so many people, but it's not just people that have done this before. Sometimes it's like learning from people who've never done it before. I personally like there's a company called Guild Education. It's run by a woman named Rachel Carlson. And she's like, you know, definitely younger and earlier in her career, but she's crushing it. And she's just incredible. And it's like, I learned so much from every time I talk to her. You know, I was talking to the CEO of GitLab the other day, and, you know, it's the first time he's ever done anything like this. And well, he's done an okay job. Right. And like, and so I learned one thing. One of our values in our company is beginner's mind, you know, and so I just learned from I learned from Michel and Mike today. I mean, this has been amazing, and learned from you, Gil. Like it's, so to me, it's like seeking the learning everywhere.
Mike, who's been your mentor, your coach that helped you?
There's a ton. The one I'll highlight is a woman who's on our board. She was also on the board at HubSpot for the first 5 years or so. Her name's Gail Goodman. She was CEO forever of Constant Contact. And I love her because there's no BS. Everything is just super direct. She cuts through like everything and just gets to like, well, like, here's really what the problem is, kind of a thing. She's been there in all the hard times that you have to go through at a startup and as a CEO. So she speaks with a lot of credibility and understanding when she's giving you advice about any problem you're facing. She's been amazing one-on-one and amazing in board meetings. I don't know, Michelle and Nick, if either of you have the like seasoned kind of, you know, CEO operator on your board that kind of pushes back on the VC investors when they say crazy things like, can't you get that done in a month, or, you know, whatever, right? And Gail's my go-to on that. There's times when I just kind of glance at her and she sort of, you know, leans into the table and says, well, like, you know, if you've run a company before, you know that that's total bullshit and whatever. And she's great. So she's been super helpful to me one-on-one on the side, but also in larger meetings and things like that.
Amazing. Thank you for being super genuine and candid and telling all your stories and having fun and sharing that with the audience and with me. I want to say big thank you, and have a wonderful weekend.
Awesome.
Thanks, Gil.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you.
So great
Thanks,
to
Mike.
thank.
See y'all. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again for joining us. I hope that you enjoyed today's discussion and will tune in again. Find all of the B2B Category Creators episodes at Metadata.io. And if you have any feedback, topics, or would like to be a guest on the show, please reach out.